The connection defines the way the calls are sent from our network to the vendor's network, or vice versa in case of incoming calls. Okay, the main parameters of a connection are the following. First one is the name, of course, then the service type. In our example, the service type is going to be voice calls. Then the network parameters will depend whether it's an outgoing connection to the network or incoming connection from the vendor's network to our network. For call termination, we need to know the IP address or the domain name and the IP port. The IP port may be different from the default SIP port 5060. For inbound calls, connection from vendor, we need to know which one of our nodes is going to receive the call. We also need to know which remote IP is sending the call to us, and we can use the rating code to apply different charges to these calls. The next parameter is the username used for authorization. Although it's not a mandatory parameter, it is highly recommended to use it. Then we have the tariff. The tariff contains rates to destinations that the vendor supports. All calls routed through this connection are going to be charged according to the tariff. Then we have the number translation rules. I have already explained that sometimes the format used in the PortaSwitch system doesn't coincide with the format used by the vendor. This is where number translation rules become necessary. The vendor may require to emit the country code 1 for calls to the US, or on the contrary, aggregate a special prefix for international calls, such as, for example, 011. 011 is a North American code for international dialing. Then the connection capacity. Capacity is the maximum number of simultaneous calls the connection allows. And the last two parameters are toggle switches. The active switch allows to quickly disable the connection without deleting its configuration, and the internal toggle shows whether this connection is intended for internal SIP-to-SIP calls or for external calls. Let's return to our web interface and create a test connection. But before we do that, we need to do one more intermediate step. Let's go to our service catalog, tariffs, and create a vendor tariff. Let's call it test tariff 1. Its currency is going to be US dollar. The service it's going to be applied is voice calls. And here is exactly where we choose vendor. So this is going to be a vendor tariff. And besides rates, we're going to include routing information in this tariff. So let's enable the toggle. Okay, let's click save. We are not going to add any rates at the moment. We're going to do this a little bit later. And now we are ready to create our connection. Okay, let's create a test connection now. Let's call it test connection YouTube 1. Our service is going to be voice calls, the type of connection SIP, and the direction is going to be to vendor. This is where we can choose our tariff. Our tariff was called test carrier tariff. Tariff is set for each connection. Our connection is active. Here is the toggle. It's not going to be internal. This is a test connection, so let's just enter hypothetical IP and set the connection capacity. Let's say 10 simultaneous calls. And now we're ready to click save. Our test connection is ready.